Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lunch Tech in Chat. I'm André Sampaio, your host today with William, my friend. Hello, William.
Hey Andre, how are you? How's the week been?
Yeah, good. We have lots of stuff that we want to talk about today. We're going to be talking about Convert GPT, Omni, that all of you guys I know have been using it and are all excited about it. There's a new model for Llama called 3.1 on Meta. New York Times War Against AI, Google nuclear reactors, and OpenAI for profit. Lots of cool stuff to talk about today.
Yeah.
Just starting on Convert GPT, have you seen it yet?
No, I haven't. I haven't actually played with it. I did play, I think, with a couple of the other models, but maybe you can give me a bit of a brief of what it is and what it does.
Yeah, so the whole idea on the Convert GPT is that now you can use the whole sort of ChatGPT front end for coding, something that is not new. Other companies have done it before. But what you can do is let's say you're generating a coding for an application, then now you've got the option that a screen sort of divides into. So you've got a screen on the side and you can interactively change the coding that you're building. So let's say you're building a coding for an application, you put what you want, function, whatever, it writes the code for you, and then interactively you can go change the code and you can ask the GPT via chat like to improve something or change something. So you're sort of lively collaborating and building that code.
Okay.
It's really exciting. Like it's a new way of not having to do like generate this code. You look at it and they say, oh, change XYZ, and then it generates again. Like you lively together with ChatGPT, you're sort of improving your building your code.
How is that different from Copilot? Like from GitHub Copilot? In the sense that, I mean, GitHub Copilot, I mean, for those that haven't experimented with it, GitHub Copilot is is essentially a autocomplete plus, code code suggestion and recommendations on pieces of it, which you can also use for,
I think
troubleshooting, for creating new functionality in your code, and other things, also like for explaining documentation of the code. But how is that?
I think if I think of Copilot is developer driven. So it's like you're doing a development and then Copilot's helping you to do your code, like you say, autocomplete or creating something, and then you're sort of interacting with the AI to generate that. On Canva, the way that I see is more language driven. So you're speaking with the model is creating it for you, and you can interact and change it if you want to. So let's say the main outcome is similar, but the way for you to get there, one is driven by developer developing, and the other one is driven by natural language generating code. So
But
even if
you can do that.
you can do that, but I think it's the purpose of how you use it.
Right. Does it mean that actually it potentially can be used maybe less so by developers themselves, but more like for, by the product managers that
As well.
just kind of want some features, but they don't necessarily always have a deep understanding of how to code, and they...
For sure. I'm developing an app. I'm not very proficient on doing Swift coding, and I've started using Canva. Like in a day, I built something that, I don't know, I would have to study documentation, understanding how it works. Like the ChatGPT just drove me through what I needed to do. Like do this, do that, do this, generate the code. Then I just follow the steps, paste the code in Swift and the Xcode, and then just compiled it. It worked. It's like,
Also, it gives you as well, like all of those other developer operational things that every developer knows how to,
it gives you the whole guidance.
Things on terminal.
You keep asking it like, how do I do this? Can you give me more examples? Can you drill down on how you would do this? Can you give me step by step? It depends how you're interacting with the model, but it drives you through like the whole process. Like even, I don't know, you're creating like authentication or you're creating a database, and it will guide you through what you need to do, like an API connection. Okay, so I want to consume data from GPT-4o. How do I do that? It will give you the guidance, like go into OpenAI website and then create an account and this and that. It gives you all the steps. So it's pretty easy.
And it's pretty good at actually
it's really good
guiding people without
really
any mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
How would you rate if you weren't a developer with a lot of with kind of like code experience?
That's a good question. I think we need someone that doesn't have any development knowledge to rate that.
Yeah, I guess.
But for me, it saved me so much time. It's just crazy.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm not a full stack developer. Don't consider myself to be a full stack developer. I can do scripts, in mostly kind of like analytics language and build some applications, like, Python, SQL and stuff like that. But I don't necessarily, and then also kind of like, I built some full stack apps with like Node.js, but it was mostly kind of like, tutorial based and things like this. And I wouldn't consider myself to be, a full stack developer from the point of view of, I can build any app, any flavor,
end-to-end
solution, that kind of stuff. I know some things from some apps that I built, but I wouldn't consider myself to be necessarily a full stack developer. I can call when people are saying bullshit, but I wouldn't necessarily say,
I'm not a full stack developer as well. Yeah.
Right. So, so it would be interesting probably to kind of like get, because I see in companies nowadays, there's a lot of people that are like, product. But then the way that I understand usually someone from product, for example, is someone that has some experience with development, but has moved from a developer or from a BA perspective and has moved into actual, guiding engineers into building products. But a lot of companies actually don't have product managers like this. Some product managers might come more like from a marketing perspective.
Or from the business,
Or from the business. Yeah. And therefore they have like features of their users that they are hearing about, but they don't necessarily have all that experience in code. So I think it would be interesting to test it out. Maybe for the listeners, if they are anyone kind of like product, maybe experiment a little bit with the Canvas, and then actually kind of like, and let us know about how your experience was, because this would be really interesting. It would be truly changing.
It is a bit of a game changer, I think. Yeah. And that takes us to the next topic, which is Omni. So I know Omni is not that new, like GPT-4o. It has been previewed for a while. I think a lot of people have seen a lot of news, but I've been using it for a while now, and I use it daily. And I'm finding it fascinating how it works. I know it's not like 100% perfect or everything. And the way that you prompt is a little bit different, because the way that it works is a little bit different. So on Omni, what you're doing is you're giving that task of reasoning to the model to do it for you. Okay. So, like, let's say when you're doing something with...
a math exam.
Yeah, but let's say, for example, if you're doing something with ChatGPT in general or any other Gen AI, what you would do is say like, I want to do this, that, ask me the questions, and then ask you the questions. You enter the questions, and then it generates you an answer. That's a normal way that you would interact, depending on something
chat-like.
Yeah, in something that designs or requires a little bit of reasoning. You're doing the reasoning on asking the model to ask you back something. The way that Omni works is you put a challenge or a question or something. By itself, it will trigger levels of the model querying the model back to generate a better answer. So let's say like if you ask a question about project management, it might even because you can expand and see some of the reasoning that has happened.
Yeah.
You don't see all the details, but you can sort of...
Yeah, how detailed is that?
Yeah, it's not very, very detailed, but it gives you an idea of what happened and what sort of line of thinking the model took to give you the answer. But it's amazing, like it can like, so for example, on the background is generating like project plans and thinking about dates and thinking about milestones. So it thinks about all the stuff. It queries it back, the questions that you would be querying someone doing the work for you. So now your initial query needs to be a lot more simplistic because you don't want to give the model how the model should think. You want to give the problem for the model to solve it for you. So that changes. It's quite a big game changer in my view.
So how does it work? Because in the case of, for example, like the traditional like chat like models, the other pre-trained models of actually OpenAI so far, you either the model is essentially kind of like querying the big kind of, essentially kind of like all of its trained data to give you some answers which might be more or less hallucinating, or you can prime the model with information, with a specific set of data, and then query that based on that data they provide. But in both cases, you have to give some sort of a reasonable level of context for it to give you a reasonable level of output, right? How does it work in this case? Because do you actually still give the model some sort of context to be able to obtain those answers in reasoning? Or?
I think when you're doing reasoning, imagine you're talking to an actual professional on that question that you're asking. So if you're doing a maths problem, for example, imagine you're talking to a really freaking experienced maths teacher, for example, right? So when you pass your query, that's how you're talking to the model. So you assuming that the model has enough context around that subject, not the actual problem, because the problem is coming from you.
Yeah.
So you're giving enough data that the model is going to query itself. Like for a problem like that, what do I need to consider? And then the model by itself will trigger the next steps and questions for the model to answer. So it's like multiple agents interacting with each other to generate a final answer, but it's all done by it's not one context window, but in one processing. It's sort of, if I think about agents, imagine like not agents in the sense of triggering agents that are triggering an action, but agents that are acting as something to reply to a question. Imagine that the model is like creating multiple agents that is talking to each other to answer that question. It's not really that, but I think that's an easier way of explaining.
Right. Okay.
So it's like the model, like in your head, if you have a problem, so if I give you a problem, you can either answer it really quickly, if that's in the top of your head, you know the answer, you give it out, or you might need to think about. When you think about, you stop for a few seconds, you might look up, or you might, like look to the corner of your eyes to the side, and your brain is ticking. When your brain's ticking, usually what you're doing, for people that are not 100% visual, you're talking to yourself. You're asking questions. Yeah. You're creating scenarios.
In language.
Yeah, you're communicating in language internally in your brain. So you're asking questions, you're creating scenarios, and then you're answering those questions until you get to a point that you're comfortable. And then that's the answer that you give out.
Yeah.
That's what the model is doing.
Right. Okay. So it's actually all of those internal kind of like conversations that the model actually spits out.
Yeah. But then you can sort of see some of what has been considered in that internal thought.
And in that internal thought, can you also see the false, like
not
negatives, for example?
Not really.
Considerations, and because we do that as humans, we take threads and we go down some sort of rabbit hole, and then so actually there's some falls in here, poke there, and then you actually come back and then you reflect on another thread, depending on the complexity of the problem, of course.
Yeah, you would have to ask the model to give you details, but when you see the reasoning is quite high level, like you just see some of the topics, like a quick summary. It doesn't go into too much detail.
And can you also interact with more like interactively in the same way that you interact with a chat on that specific problem?
You can at the end. So when an answer has been spit out, it has memory, so it knows the answer and the reasoning, and you can, in the chain of conversation, continue that conversation.
That's great.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I'm loving that.
Yeah. And you're using kind of more like for your activity.
Yeah, the only downside is that you can't do, when you're doing 4.0, you can't do web search. You can't upload any documents or files. So it's purely text based.
Yeah.
Because like if you're using 4.0, not Omni 1.0, but if you're just using the normal Omni, it can search the web, you can upload documents, but when you're using the 4.1.0, which is the one with reasoning, it's just doing text based on the LLM. So it's the context that you give, the context that it has on the LLM, using the context windows and the reasoning. You can't add anything more into it.
And can you, I guess, challenge its reasoning?
Oh yeah, you can.
And does it respond to that?
It does.
It does respond to having an issue with reasoning. By saying like, I don't agree for X, Y, and Z reasons, or
explain me how you got into this answer.
Well, I guess like more like a Socratic method of actually finding a truth, if you will.
Yeah, you can.
You kind of like, you go down a path of logic and then you say, well, your logic is flawed. I think your logic is flawed here for reason A or B, C.
You can.
And does it, and it does reevaluate its logic. Okay, interesting.
Which is really good.
Yeah, really interesting. Just one last one, because this is fascinating. This is a fascinating topic. Have you tried to combine the two models into any kind of like application where kind of like you have like that text-based kind of outputs that
what I have done is start with 4.0, do research, do all the stuff like data gathering, search the web for this, search the web for that, generate a paper for me on this subject, get that output, and then use that output as an input when I'm using reasoning.
When you find a problem that you can't solve.
Yeah, so even not that advanced. Like I'll give you a simple example. Now, and you've seen this as well, Google released something called Notebook LM. So Notebook LM, you can add a lot of stuff on it, and it generates sort of a conversational chat that you can consume the information. You can search web or YouTube and things like that. What I have done is I have searched my own data, generated my own papers, used the reasoning to put that into a context that would make sense, and then put it in Notebook LM so I could understand that.
Right.
So, yeah, for the research that I'm doing, instead of reading, 300 pages and trying to dissect and understand that information.
Can you put a lot
like I was trying to understand, for example, all those bills in California on AI and getting to the detail of it.
Yeah.
There's some stuff like on the FBI sort of documents that they open on all the the UFOs stuff. So instead of reading stuff that I'm interested on, now I'm doing research, putting the data together, using reasoning to curate that data in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then using something else to tell me that data back to me so I can consume something that it would have taken me a couple of hours in 10 minutes.
Possibly much more, depending on the amount of content. I've consulted, like in the recent past, I've done some stuff where I literally put probably the equivalent of 5,000 pages into that RAG based kind of like RAG, for those don't get the notion of reg is essentially kind of like you reinforcing the model with a specific data set rather than actually using the generic one. Put like 5,000 pages about some about who is Satoshi Nakamoto and all of the actual academic research that had been done on it in terms of identification, different evidences gathered. Amazing.
Did you get to someone?
We got to a number of people. I'm doing actually, by the way, guys, I'm doing a separate podcast this weekend on that topic, on all of that data gathering, but very, very interesting. Like all sorts of, academics that did theory around the personality of the creator of Bitcoin and who it might be.
Isn't there like a Netflix series on it now?
Oh, there's a recent HBO.
HBO, yeah.
It was actually released that actually pointed out to this guy, this Canadian guy, Peter Tosh. He's a relatively, full respect, but relatively minor contributor of the Bitcoin community, based in Canada. And they thought that Peter Tosh was the guy, but based on all of the evidence, the 5,000 pages that I used the AI actually to do some work with me, I don't think he's in that pool. But anyway,
gotcha.
This is for another day. Cool. So we moving on a little bit to the Llama 3.1 Nemotron model. You had some stuff around that.
So it's really interesting. Is 70 billion parameter open source LLM, and it has been built in conjunction with NVIDIA.
Okay.
It just got released and is the most powerful LLM out there. Is even more powerful than GPT-4o, and it's completely open source.
What is it? So in terms of like parameterization, it's quite similar to the levels of like the latest OpenAI.
It's quite similar, but it seems to be faster, better responses. So all those metrics that they are doing on LLMs now.
Right.
So just in overall quality, that's the top of the chart now. But it's really interesting to see two things. First is any top of the chart doesn't stay on the top of the chart for too long. Top of the chart is now like a week max.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because something got released and then says someone releases something else. But the other thing is NVIDIA as the biggest hardware and sort of GPU producers that everyone is using, even OpenAI, sort of partnering with Meta to create to evolve the open source LLM model. And I think that's the really interesting part here.
Why do you think that interesting? We covered some stuff around open source in a previous version of the program where we talked about Mark Zuckerberg and his strategy for Meta and the application of Meta and all that kind of stuff. But why do you think that sends some sort of like message? The fact that the biggest manufacturer of semiconductors is as well doing the...
Well, from an NVIDIA point of view, they want as many people as possible to be building AI solutions, right?
Yeah.
So making the software free so people depend on the hardware when they are the oligarchs or the only company that is producing all the most powerful GPUs at the moment.
Yeah.
It makes total sense, right? Like you dominate the market, you're giving people what they need for free so they can buy your stuff.
Yes. Okay.
So,
but why like the open source aspect? Like from that,
I think open source opens up a new level of possibilities of people not being stuck to the vendors, because then you've got Microsoft, you've got Google, you've got Perplexity, you've got all these companies, OpenAI. When their demand grows, they need to enhance their data centers, which takes them to need more hardware, and that's when NVIDIA will earn their money, let's say, or make they sell. OpenAI and all the companies are partnering up to produce GPUs and maybe take some of the chunk of NVIDIA from the market, which is another
there's a
thing.
very limited number of GPUs that can be used for training of those models.
Yeah. And having a competitor is probably something that NVIDIA doesn't want, but for other companies is more sustainable in a long term for sure.
Yeah.
But then if you think about why would you partner up with Meta? So Meta's free, Meta's open source, Meta's giving the tools for people to build and consume, even for their products to evolve. So when you put it in open source, if everyone is sort of contributing, of course, the speed of development will be scaled by the number of contributors that you have on that project.
Yeah, logically.
So if your focus is not on selling LLM or selling API connections to your LLM on consumption or whatever, your strategy can be to enhance your own products, which is what I feel like Meta's doing. They are making their products more intelligent using AI and getting something that people are contributing to always be on top of the chat makes it easier for them to keep using that and create some sort of credibility with Meta.
And they could always wrap that open source with some sort of like enterprise solution.
They could, but they haven't been doing that. Like they just integrating with their products for now.
Yeah.
But I think once you see NVIDIA sort of stepping up and helping on the development of that, I think in NVIDIA's point of view is probably if we give something that is open source and free, and startup companies and companies around the world can take a model like that and just build into their own solutions, that will mean what? It will mean that they need more hardware, they need more power to process things, and that means probably more business for NVIDIA, right?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's something a little bit bigger than that from the NVIDIA. So it's been a little while, so kind of like it's a little bit escaped me where I read that, but I do know that NVIDIA they have their own solutions for generative AI, which you can do not only kind of like this whole business model in this LLM space is not only providing the hardware, they also have solutions of models that I think they have.
I saw they had a like a model that was coming out. I don't know if it has coming out.
Yeah, I've seen some.
And I don't know if it's paid or free. I haven't looked into.
But actually, coming back to the open source, if they are enabling some third party to train an open source model, that would make sense for them to then, hey, I'm already the biggest semiconductor manufacturer and I offer some LLM AI solutions and SDKs and stuff like this for developers. If I partner with actually an open source provider, I can actually use.
Yeah, but as well, so imagine you opening your own startup, right?
Yeah.
If you open your own startup today, you can have two things. You can consume an existing model and then have a product that is using RAG or using some sort of prompt engineering that will make something in your application.
Yeah.
Or you can take a model and make that model specific on something by training that model, let's say on medical or something like that. And then you become, you come with a new model that will be specialized on something.
Yeah. Medicine and education.
Well, so if you do that, if you have an open source model that is, if you try to start from scratch, you're not going to get anywhere because the models are already massive. So if you get a model that is open source, you train that, you need hardware to run that shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the pie of the market that they're trying to get. Because even if you say, oh yeah, Llama's free. Okay, it's free. If you want to build a solution right now, you can't just run it on your computer. You can run on Hugging Face or something like that. But it's not as easy like for a company to just go into Microsoft Azure and consume OpenAI or directly from OpenAI, right? So I think this is a different niche of the market that they trying to target.
You mean NVIDIA?
Yeah, NVIDIA and Meta.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, moving on. This I could probably stay for hours talking about the strategy of these different players and how they are kind of like, I'm trying to verticalize or buddy up with different players to enable their distribution models, but this could take way longer in the time that we have today. So I guess kind of like moving on to some topics that are maybe a little bit more, I guess, business oriented. And I have heard some story. I think you're talking about it before, about New York Times and its war against AI. So what's the deal with that?
The deal with that is, as we know, the practices of training models and the practices of scraping web pages, it's not very... Is ethical or fair or whatever?
Depends on what the models.
Some people will say that
just the pockets of their shareholders, right?
Some people will say that is legal. Some people will say that is wrong.
Yeah.
That it's not. OpenAI have been doing a lot of deals with lots of companies to use their data. So when you're doing like web search on some websites that are not allowed, it will block you. And then there's things like you need to put on your robo text file. So it knows that it can be scrapable, but then people say that, oh no, I put it on my terms and conditions. But if you put it in your terms and conditions,
you mean the file that you put a robot.txt?
Yeah. So okay. So let's start with this, right? You've got a website, and like Reddit, because Reddit's had a similar problem with Bing and some other companies' Perplexity, same as what's going on with New York Times now. But let's say you've got a website. There's the robot.txt file.
Yeah, for those that don't know about this, I just like to give you a bit of context. So whenever a application builder is putting, is kind of like spinning up a new, say a web application for a journal or for a newspaper or whatever, usually application builders, they include within the directory of their files, they include a file that is called robot.txt. So if you're not familiar with that, or it is the first time that you've heard, Google it. It's very interesting. And usually within that file, the developers include what is it that is permissible to scrape and what it's, just, I guess, gentlemanly not to scrape data from.
Yeah. The initial idea of this file is for search engines like Google to be able to find your site when someone's searching for something.
Yeah.
And now it's being used for AI scraping as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
So imagine you've got something like Bing Search or Perplexity, and then once you're searching a web page, nothing is in the robot file. So you go scrape the data, give the result, and then the company get pissed off because they said, in my terms and conditions, I have said that my data cannot be used for AI. But if it's in your terms and conditions, how is the solution going to be able to see it without scraping the page?
Right. Yeah.
Because terms and conditions is a web page.
Yeah, it's a web page.
If you don't scrape it, you never see it.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So what happened there is, does it mean that the New York Times, they had that robot text?
No. So I'm just giving you an example because there's something that has been happening. But New York Times is now in a fight against, they started with OpenAI and now they going to Perplexity, and they are the biggest news channel in the world today. Their revenue is all driven on news, so they want people to be... They want people to be going to the websites to consume news so they can suit their advertisement, and then that's how they make money, right? So if now AI companies are not paying to consume their content to be used for AI search or scraping or anything, or even data learning or training a model, how do you keep a business like that alive producing news? So they're
going to build a lot of journalists.
Yeah, of course.
And then you actually create a lot of
replace journalists by AI, and then the AI doesn't have where to search on the web anymore. Yeah. So it starts searching on social media, which is all fake news and generating fake news. And then the searchers are going to those websites and consuming fake news, and now in a fake world.
Okay. Leaving the tangent aside, we'll go back to the main topic. So what happened?
Yeah. So in just keeping this short, New York Times doesn't want those companies to be consuming their data anymore. And they are starting to sue those companies because they finding traces that their data have been used on search and training.
How can you find
I don't know
information
that's a really good question.
Has been used for training the model?
One of the things
those
is
AI companies, they are not particularly transparent in terms of all of the data that has been scraped.
One of the things that we know is, that big dump file of the internet. I forgot what is it called.
The web archive.
Yeah, the web archive. Yeah. A lot of the models use that.
Yeah.
So if you go there and you find that your data there is very likable, that models have been trained to use your data because they do. Most of the companies, they do publicly say that they have used the web archive for training.
Yeah, okay.
So this is one of the ways, but that's a really good question. I don't know how they can prove that the data have been used or is being used. I mean, if you're doing search,
the web archive is that you have opened it, right? You wouldn't be in the web archive unless you have opened your data.
All around the robot.txt issue again.
Right.
But the problem is not only with that. Like, I think if you're doing like Perplexity that does web search, you can do a web search and ask something that is in your news.
Yeah.
Because when it comes back, it gives all the reference, and then you can see if the data, if it is being able to consume data from your website or not.
Yeah.
So the search part of it is easy, but the training part of it is the complicated one to.
Right. So you get like the content on the web page, but then is actually whether that content has been fed into some model and how you can prove that content fed in the model.
Yeah, but the two things are problems. The web search is a problem, and the LLM training retrieval is a problem. Yeah.
Interesting.
Because you don't consider as a normal web search when you're doing a argumented retrieval from someone's website, scraping the data. And now we're getting to the zone that normal web search like Google or Bing or whatever is different from Perplexity or Bing search that are actually doing argumented retrievals from data.
I suppose the difference is the fact that Google has built its machine by doing the PageRank model.
Yeah.
It's kind of like indexing all of that data from the web and then
is driving the traffic to your website.
And so there's a benefit for you that based on the page rank and number of people that actually kind of visit your website, your pages are at the top, right?
Yeah.
So therefore there's a benefit for you that Google does that indexing for you. But when all that the model is doing is about actually taking a lot of the information from our website rather than actually giving you any benefit in terms of indexing, in terms of that researching and bring you flux of users, then, or at least you cannot prove that the flux of user will continue into the future, then it's,
because it won't. It's just reading your website, summarizing for me so I don't have to go to your website and read the news.
Yeah, and so long as when you're reading it every single time is not pinging your website to inform you that a user is retrieving that information from
but even if it does
some sort of revenue.
Even if it does, if it gives you some revenue, because even if it does, if it doesn't drive the traffic to your website, you're not consuming the website's ads.
Yeah, exactly. That's
so even if you're getting a ping of, I have a visit, I had 1 million visits, you're not earning any money.
But can you imagine a scenario like in this would be probably a weird one where all of these, like these interactions with those GPT models, they are making your life a little bit simpler by removing all of that noise that you have in a lot of websites with, advertisement, all that kind of stuff, even if you use ad blockers or whatnot. Could you imagine that because of the pressure from some of these players, that all of a sudden now you start actually seeing advertisements on your searches of or on your queries on a GPT model just to please those guys because they are suing you?
Yeah,
that would be a very
at some point, like they have some sort of revenue model. Like if you are a paid member, they get a share when they search your website, sort of like Spotify or something like that.
Yeah.
And
like
if you
a
are
royalty,
if you're a free user, then you need to consume ads on your UI, so some of that revenue goes to the people that you're consuming that. Yeah, something crazy like that could potentially happen in the
could be the way if the war becomes not just one player showing everybody, but like multiple.
Yeah, but lots of players are already doing that.
Showing each other, then that could be kind of like okay, guys, let's sit at the table and do a deal. That could happen, right?
And that takes us to the next conversation, which is, if you are an AI company and there's such a big hype right now, how do you make money? And do you want to make money? And OpenAI does. And what that's
too. I mean, the valuation is crazy.
Yeah, so they do wanna they don't want to be, they want to be a for-profit company. Alt Semen wants to be a billionaire, trillionaire, or whatever.
Yeah.
Lots of people don't agree and they live in OpenAI. But this is happening. OpenAI is going to become a for-profit company.
Yeah.
And their focus will be on making money. Right now, they've been getting all these raises and funds and keeping them alive and just above the water. But this is going to change. So how do you see this future, and how are they doing that? I know you've been looking into
I've been doing a little bit like a look into what the shifts in the structure of OpenAI and how they're going about it. So in a nutshell, OpenAI they're not necessarily innovating that structure. So just like to be clear, they are following the models of some other companies. I think Amazon has done that with AI, and I believe Google might be there are some aspects of actually Google that also follow that model. So the model is called a PBC, short for public benefit company. So what they do in there is essentially for companies, in the specific case of like OpenAI, companies that were like projects that were originally kind of like open source projects that had a original vision for benefiting humanity, even though it's really hard to define what that actually means. But let's assume this is common knowledge and everybody understands what benefits humanity actually.
Yeah.
The public benefit company allows you to keep that original vision that they had as an original open source project by splitting out into two entities. One entity that is a commercially driven entity, which is the one that supposedly, very certainly, Sam Altman is going to be the CEO or the chair of the board, and he's going to be leading that because he wants to commercialize and to make money with OpenAI.
He wants to be rich.
He wants to be rich. Apparently, he doesn't think that he's rich enough. And I mean, he's doing great stuff for all of us. I mean, up until now, let's see how the future actually looks like.
Yeah.
And he's going to be driving that commercial arm so he can do his deals with
Microsoft,
Apple, Google, semiconductor companies, electricity.
Not Tesla.
Electricity company, kind of like, reactors, etc. We'll come to that, by the way. There's a final topic. Whereas actually on the other side, there will be another group of people, maybe some that are a little bit more like, open source maxis, or some people that still believe in that original vision of benefiting humanity, when they develop artificial superintelligence, which is going to be part of the PBC. So part of the public benefit company. So actually they can have one entity kind of, I don't know how that works in reality, but kind of challenging each other a little bit. So, almost like what Google used to have, but fired a lot of those people, kind of like an ethics board that would actually challenge the people on development of AI internally.
Yeah.
Something like that, right? And these would be the people that would be channeling into that PBC entity. And therefore, if the models that OpenAI produces are in conflict with that, then I think there might be some sort of challenging of what those models are doing.
Yeah.
I mean,
that is just for the public to see.
Maybe, it's something for the public to see and continue believing, or at least for them actually to keep their mission. Suppose they don't want to change the mission that they want to benefit using AI to benefit humanity, right? It's like they don't have the slogan from Google, like, don't do evil. So they can do evil.
They can do evil. It's not part of my
slogan. Like the public benefit company with their old slogan.
Yeah.
So
and it's interesting how fast this is growing. And I know we're gonna talk about atomic reactors and stuff. But did you see that Tesla released the Tesla robots and they cost $30,000 for you to have a robot at your home?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
$30,000.
But it's like
Yeah, it can help you around the house. Like it can do domestic stuff. It can look after your pet.
This is the stuff.
The Jetsons. Is here.
There's the stuff of a movie. We probably can talk more in detail
next
about
time.
this. But there's a couple of movies actually that has come up. One's called Megan. I don't know if you've heard of it. Yeah. It's a domestic. Yeah. And there's another one that is subservience. It's about a AI that is a domestic nanny of a household and turns jealous on the wife.
Wow.
Because it starts developing consciousness.
Yeah.
Anyways, this is
for
another topic. But
if you're interested for this conversation, leave in the comments.
Leave in the comments. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So coming back to the main topic about reactors. Yeah. So Google is actually apparently going full on that area. So they've decided to sign some sort of deal with some companies that actually build, or not necessarily build, but reactivate actually old reactors.
Yeah, nuclear reactors.
Nuclear reactors. Yeah, we're talking about electricity here. And this is coming back to a topic that I think we covered in another version of the podcast, which is like, yeah, cool, everybody's focusing on semiconductors, but if you're training and kind of exponentially training newer and newer models, and to train those models is actually very expensive from a unit cost of electricity, not only the semiconductors that you have to have. So now some of the big companies, and Google is spearheading that, are actually going off and say like, okay, I'm going to actually guarantee that I actually have enough energy for the next 10
that
to 15
is only
years.
mine.
That is only mine.
I'm not sharing
to utilize to build my own AI models. So yeah, Google went out and decided to do this deal with they're building 7 reactors.
7 nuclear reactors.
So for those
in a world that everyone has been trying to turn off the nuclear reactors and looking for something that's a bit more safe.
Well, actually, not necessarily, right? Depends on where you live. If you live in Japan, probably shouldn't be turning up a lot of nuclear reactions because you have seismic activity, right? But nuclear reactors is a relatively easy, fast solution for the neutral, like carbon neutral kind of carbon neutral. And
until you have to do something with your nuclear waste.
Yeah. Right. But this has been a problem for the last 50 years, and we're still kind of just say, I'll just ship into space and
ship into space, put it in Mars, or just dig it under the ground.
Yeah, make a deal with Elon Musk and put some of those SpaceX kind of like with a bunch of like nuclear waste and then ship into space. The space is big enough for us.
Yeah.
So that should be okay. But yeah, so they're doing that.
Dumping ground. The space is gonna be a dumping ground.
That's probably be a second phase of their strategy. But so for those that actually don't have an idea how much energy that represents or how much production capacity that represents. So those 7 nuclear reactions
reactors.
Reactors, sorry. They correspond to roughly about the same consumption of a country like Argentina.
Wow.
This is like a 45 million population.
Wow.
So it's not a small thing to try to ring fence it or reactivate some.
Yes, but doing a grain, solar, wind is too complicated.
No, too complicated.
Let's just go blown nuclear.
And it's much easier just like to activate some actually.
Of course it is.
Reactors that
it's cheaper, easier, quicker.
Easier, quicker.
Less space.
And ticks the box of environmental. I mean, some environmentalists around carbon neutrality and in the UN goals. So I think that's good.
That's enough. That's what they need.
That's
to tick the boxes.
That's all the box that they need to.
So BlackRock don't take the investment away from them.
Yeah, or they don't have like to have some deal with some or enter into US politics problems around fracking or using any sort of fossil fuels, or they don't have to even go down that path, and they can guarantee themselves a future. So
cool. Hope you guys, this conversation was interesting. Hope you didn't sleep listening to us talking, but if you did enjoy, leave your comments. Bring up some ideas of stuff that we should be talking about. Ask us questions so we can interact with you guys, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Yeah, next lunch.
Shit.